Hello, 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 guys. Welcome back. We're going to be starting a new video or a new book in this video. We're going to be reading The Sacred Art of Forgiveness. This is by Marcia Ford. I do know that in the last few videos, our authors have talked a lot about not attaching and not giving consent for people to hurt you by not attaching and giving them power in that way. But some of us, many of us, may not be ready to go there, depending on where we are in our journey, depending on what we've gone through. So what I wanted to do was read this book because I feel like a lot of people, this would reach a broader audience, as far as this is something I think a lot of us think about. Forgiveness, whether we need to be forgiven, whether we need to forgive somebody or we're unwilling. This author is going to take us through the art of forgiveness. We're going to learn about the most fundamental thing and move on regarding steps in learning how to forgive. So each chapter is very short. There will be just a brief explanation of what she's kind of talking about, what the subject will cover, and then she'll give us a reflection, and then she'll give us something to practice. So if you want to keep a pen and paper handy, that might be helpful. And we'll go ahead and read. We're going to read the introduction, and we'll also read the first few chapters. As I've said in my previous videos, I don't necessarily feel like reading the introduction is something that's important in like the fun books that I read. But I do think in these types of books, the introduction can be very helpful because it gives us an understanding of why the author is writing this book, where they're coming from, and even helpful information on how to read the book and what to keep in mind and anything special that we may need to know. So let's go ahead and get started. Introduction. I was nearly 20 years old before I understood what it meant to truly forgive someone. At that time, I felt ancient, much too old to be learning such a basic life lesson. How come no one had ever explained this amazing, life-transforming concept to me before? Now, some 35 years later, I realize how young I was to be learning such an incredible skill, an art, and a sacred one at that. I've had to relearn and refine that art over the years, of course, and at times, my willingness and ability to forgive has been tested to the max. But between my own experiences and my observation of others' experiences, I have become convinced that learning to forgive is one of life's greatest lessons. For me, that first lesson in radical forgiveness came at a price that many people would understandably be unwilling to pay. As a college freshman in the late 1960s, I had already been immersed in a hedonistic, if it feels good, do it kind of lifestyle for several years. Problem was, what felt good at the moment felt pretty crummy later on. But I had no idea how to stop doing what felt good. My friends were as little help to me as I was to them. We would not admit to each other that an abundance of free love and a perpetual state of altered consciousness didn't necessarily result in good mental health. By the spring of my freshman year, I could best be described as a wreck. I needed professional help, but the only thing I could think to do was seek out the personal advice of someone older and supposedly wiser. So I paid a visit to this older and wiser someone, a man I had known all my life and would have trusted with that life. If anyone had my back, it was Elmer. No, that's not his real name. I found that it sometimes helps to think of your offender as a cartoon character, and Elmer Fudd works just fine in this case. Elmer had always been there for me, and Elmer would be there to help me find my way out of the psychedelic maze I was living in. You know what's coming, right? Sure enough, before I could tell Mr. Fudd why I was at his door, he began to come on to me. I won't go into the gories. Let's just say his intentions were obvious. I managed to extricate myself from the situation, and I returned home physically unmolested, but emotionally shattered. What Elmer managed to do was set me up for even more wreckage. As a result, I have only fragmented memories of one entire year of college, and I can't exactly vouch for any of the other years either. Neither my behavior nor my memory loss is entirely Elmer's fault, of course, and I've never blamed my subsequent downward spiral on him. There's so much I can blame him for that there's no need to overdo it. He obviously betrayed my trust in him and sought to take advantage of me at a highly vulnerable time in my life. He cheapened our lifelong friendship and treated me in a way that no woman should ever be treated. His behavior was repulsive and lecherous and frightening. But this was not some raincoat flasher on the seedy side of Manhattan, someone I could dismiss as a creepy sicko. This was someone I have to have contact with in the future. On my way toward a lifetime of bitterness, resentment, and exceedingly awkward social engagements, I came upon a bend in the road, a personal encounter with none other than God. No one was more surprised than I that the God I had so assiduously avoided turned out to be personally interested in me and relentlessly forgiving of the disinterest I had historically shown in return. This was very cool indeed, but again, there was that price tag. God, as it turned out, seemed to expect me to be relentlessly forgiving as well. I believe with every fiber of my being that God would love me even if I wasn't the forgiving sort. But early on, I realized that God really did know what was best for me, and that by cooperating with the Spirit of God, I do a whole lot better in life than I would if left to my own devices. Given that my own devices had routinely malfunctioned up to that point, cooperation was a no-brainer. I'm not saying that judgmentalism was one of my primary character flaws or anything, but for whatever reason, it became clear that job one on God's to-do list for me was learn to see other people as God sees them. That was all well and good, except for the fact that other people included Elmer, who was not a cartoon character, but a flesh and blood child of God, and I would have to forgive him. Since that time, I've learned a great deal about forgiveness, and not just because I've had to ask for it so often. Having experienced its power in my own life, I became something of an amateur observer of how forgiveness works in a person's life, what it looks like, and what kind of impact it has on the forgiver and the forgiven alike. I've also observed what its absence looks like, and I can assure you that it doesn't make for a pretty picture. Early on, I realized that unforgiveness equals ugliness, and that revelation clearly tipped the scales in favor of developing a forgiving spirit. Couple my observation of the act of forgiveness with my occupation as a journalist and author, and what you end up with is this book. But why? Why do we need another book on forgiveness? I have the answer to that one. Because we do. Because forgiveness is in such short supply. We need to keep preaching the message, hearing the message, and living the message. And then there's the matter of the different and distinct ways in which we each grab hold of a spiritual reality. For some people, a step-by-step how-to book on forgiveness is just what they need. Others may be better able to grasp the concept through an academic book. You can have 10 books on forgiveness by 10 different authors, and each one will appeal to a different sort of reader. If you gravitate toward more reflective and highly personal types of books, then you're my kind of reader. You'll get what I'm saying right away, which means this book stands a good chance of changing your life for the better. One important note, she wants you to know this. Throughout, I've used the male pronoun when referring to God. I'm fully aware of the feminine characteristics of God, just as I am aware of the conflicts that arise when gender-specific pronouns are used. But at heart, I am a writer, and I believe in communicating clearly rather than muddying up the text to satisfy a variety of theological tastes. Where possible, I avoid the use of pronouns, but it isn't always possible, at least not without ending up with the host of annoying sentences. Forgive me for this, okay? All right, so the first chapter is titled, Why Bother? Keep getting things in my way here. Before we begin to discover what forgiveness is and what it isn't, we need to look at an even more fundamental issue, the question of why it is so important to forgive. I'll go back yet another step and I'll tell you why it's important to start with that question, because that's where most people generally start. Try it for yourself. Suggest that your friend forgive her significant other for sending an innocuous reply to a text or an email from an old girlfriend, and listen for the first thing out of her mouth. I can guarantee that it won't be a definition of forgiveness. It will likely be a mix of indignant exclamations and equally indignant questions. Forgive him? Why should I forgive him? I'll never do that. Forgive him? No way. No, she won't start with a definition. We're so sure that we know what forgiveness is that we skip the defining step entirely. We go straight to the part where we push our nose out of joint, stiffen our back, and express our righteous anger while alternately huffing and puffing. And the questions just keep coming. Why bother? Why should I forgive someone who has hurt me? Why should he have the satisfaction of knowing I have forgiven him after he betrayed me? If I forgive him, won't he see that as a license to keep on hurting me, expecting me to forgive him again and again? It's just not fair. Well, no, it's not fair. Forgiveness isn't about fairness. Neither is it about asking for more trouble from the one who did you wrong. In fact, it's not even about the offender. Forgiveness is mostly about you. That's right. It's about letting go of your past, changing your present, and protecting your future. It's about making a better life for yourself and in some small way, making a better world as well. It's about the best part of you, those noble character traits that come together in one magnificent grand gesture that proves your mettle. Courage, humility, compassion, fortitude, resilience, grace. It's about the gifts of the Spirit you exhibit and the gifts you receive: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faith, gentleness, and self-control, each time you extend forgiveness to another person. And still, the questions won't go away. Questions like these. Isn't forgiveness a sign of weakness? What if the person doesn't show any remorse? Will I have to let my sister back into my life after I've forgiven her? I thought I'd forgiven my ex-husband, but I can't forget what he did to me. Do I have to forget in order to truly forgive? What's in it for me? I mean, I'm the one who's been brutalized. I'm the one who needs healing. What do I have to gain by forgiving that monster? How can I be sure she won't hurt me again? I don't need to forgive anyone. I'm the one who needs to be forgiven. How can I get over the shame I feel and not be so afraid to ask for forgiveness? I keep going over the situation I'm in, looking for someone to blame. But the only one I can blame is God. Is it possible for me to forgive God? The Bible says I have to forgive the same person a crazy number of times. Is that true? Those are all valid questions about forgiveness, which is nearly always possible to grant, and reconciliation, which is not always possible or even desirable. What's disturbing about some of the questions, though, is the number of underlying misconceptions about forgiveness that they reveal. Until those misconceptions are corrected, we may have a hard time understanding why we should bother forgiving our offenders. Once we have a better grasp on forgiveness, we may have a hard time understanding why we didn't bother sooner. Here's the reflection. Reflect on this thought from Baptist pastor Gordon Atkinson. It really doesn't matter if the person who hurt you deserves to be forgiven. Forgiveness is a gift you give yourself. You have things to do and you want to move on. Think about each sentence and how it applies to your life. How do you feel about forgiving a person who you don't feel deserves it? Do you consider forgiveness to be a gift to yourself? Do you believe that forgiving someone who has offended you can help you get on with your life? And now here's the practice. Write your own list of questions about forgiveness. What, if anything, would you like to understand better about the concept of forgiveness, the concept of reconciliation? In your previous experiences with both concepts, think about what went right and what went wrong, and express your impressions in the form of questions that you hope to have answered. For example, let's say you recently reconciled with your girlfriend, but now you're having second thoughts. You might express these thoughts in this way. Should I have given this more time? Did we reconcile too soon? Does she really understand how much she hurt me? Why do I still have this feeling that I can't trust her? Even if you haven't found the answers to your own questions by the end of this book, you will have clarified your thoughts on the situation and you'll be able to seek out the answers on your own. Each chapter holds a few quotes, so I'll read the quotes once I'm finished with each chapter. It is impossible even to begin the act of loving one's enemies without the prior acceptance of the necessity over and over again of forgiving those who inflict evil and injury upon us. Martin Luther King Jr. Forgiveness is a gift of high value, yet its cost is nothing. Betty Smith, she's an author. She wrote A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. Never forget the 3 powerful resources you always have available to you. Love, prayer, and forgiveness. H. Jackson Brown Jr. He who has not forgiven an enemy has not yet tasted one of the most sublime enjoyments of life. Johann K. Latimer. Humanity is never so beautiful as when praying for forgiveness or else forgiving another. Jean-Paul Richter. All right, Chapter 2, An Act of Love. When I discovered I was pregnant with my first child, I read every article and book I could get my hands on about pregnancy, childbirth, and child rearing. And of course, every woman in my life who had ever had a child offered advice on everything, from the best foods to eat while breastfeeding to preparing for my child's first day of school. But no one prepared me for the astonishing realization that I had known little about love before the day my daughter was born. I thought I was well acquainted with love in all its spiritual, physical, and emotional glory. But on that day, I discovered this new and deeper lesson about love. Love is knowing you take a bullet to save your child's life. That's a far cry from the kind of love that accompanies many of our acts of forgiveness. And there are many levels of love that lie between the love of a parent for a child and the love that God gives us, say, to be able to forgive a stranger who ran a red light and killed a woman and her unborn twins. The latter is nothing like the various kinds of love we associate with family, friends, or romantic partners. Some kinds of love come to us naturally. Others can come no other way but supernaturally. Forgiving a person who has hurt us deeply is contrary to human nature, which is exactly why we need to draw on superhuman power to accomplish it. But then God pulls a fast one on us. The power to forgive goes hand in hand with the power to love. Lo and behold, there we are, dumbstruck by the love we have for someone we had only planned to forgive. We can reject that love, I suppose, but then the forgiveness wouldn't be genuine forgiveness. The choice to follow love through to its completion is the choice to seek completion within ourselves, says best-selling author Marianne Williamson in her book Illuminata. Forgiveness does not mean that we suppress anger. Forgiveness means that we have asked for a miracle, the ability to see through mistakes that someone has made to the truth that lies in all our hearts. We do indeed ask for a miracle each time we grant forgiveness. A miracle of supernatural love for someone we may have once considered to be an enemy. Martin Luther King Jr. knew what it meant to forgive his enemies and experience a profound love for them, despite the injustices they inflicted on others. One of the reasons his reputation has steadily grown over the years is that people have become increasingly aware of the deep and abiding love he had for everyone. Once the dust of the civil rights movement settled, we could see more clearly the dichotomy between the hateful anger of militants and the righteous anger of King. King so successfully lived out so many of the truths in the scriptures that he left us without excuse for failing to do the same. Jesus says, to love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Matthew 5:44. Between the impossibility of being like Jesus and the familiarity of these words, we find it easy to weasel our way out of following them. We sure do. And then along comes a man like King, loving his enemies and praying for those who openly persecuted him and making us look bad. It is possible, he says through his actions. It is possible to be angry and yet not sin. Ephesians 4:26. It's possible to bless those who persecute you, bless and do not curse. Romans 12:14. To love your enemies, do good to those who hate you. Luke 6:27. Love is the only force capable of transforming an enemy into a friend, King once said. We never get rid of an enemy by meeting hate with hate. We get rid of an enemy by getting rid of enmity. ENMITY, in case that doesn't come through. By its very nature, hate destroys and tears down. By its very nature, love creates and builds up. Love transforms with redemptive power. Love may not transform your enemy into a friend, but the point is that it could. It has that kind of power. If you've forgiven someone but can't bring yourself to say you love him, no need to be concerned. Forgiveness is so closely linked with love that it's nearly impossible to have one without the other. There's a good chance that you're confusing the gift of supernatural love with the feeling of love. One is a spiritual reality, the other a human emotion. And here is the reflection for this chapter. What are the lessons love has taught you? Are you able to make a distinction between love as a supernatural gift and love as a natural human feeling? Many people believe love is a choice we make each day. How has that played out in your life? I'm going to fix that. Sorry. And now here's the practice. Ask God to infuse you with a supernatural love for someone you've had a hard time liking. It doesn't have to be an enemy, just someone who might grate on you. Pray that the Spirit will love the person through you and ask how you can perform loving acts for that person until your love for them comes around. Then go out and do what you feel the Spirit is leading you to do. Okay, and here are the quotes from this chapter. Forgiveness is love practiced among people who love poorly. It sets us free without wanting anything in return. Henry Nouwen. Resentment toward any human being cannot exist in the same heart with love to God. William T. Ham. Today I forgive all those who have ever offended me. I give my love to all thirsty hearts, both to those who love me and to those who do not love me. Paramahansa Yogananda. The man who foolishly does me wrong, I will return to him the protection of my most ungrudging love. And the more evil comes from him, the more good shall go from me. Buddha. And now we'll do one more chapter, chapter 3. It starts with you. Barbara has been estranged from her brother for so long she eventually lost track of him entirely. That would have been okay with her 5 years ago. Back then, she didn't care much whether she ever saw him again or not. He had lived with Barbara and her husband for a few months after being released from a rehab, but she had kicked him out after she smelled beer on his breath, or what she thought was beer. She began to wonder if she'd been wrong. Sometime later, Barbara and her husband began to notice that little things around their house were missing, mostly small but valuable items, like seldom used jewelry and a few collectible coins. In anger, she called her brother and accused him of stealing from her. Yes, he admitted, he had taken a few things and sold them so he could find a place to live. Furious, Barbara hung up and swore she would have nothing to do with him until he apologized and asked her forgiveness. Within 3 years, both of Barbara's parents died, and she felt a compelling need to be reconciled with her brother, the only surviving member of her biological family. Today, she lives with the regret that she never forgave him, sought his forgiveness, or attempted to reconcile with him when she had the chance. She prays regularly that he'll somehow reappear on someone's radar so she can get in contact with him. Barbara had learned a hard lesson about forgiveness and reconciliation. You can't wait for the other person to make the first move. I suspect her brother was too ashamed of his actions to ever think she could forgive him, so he kept his distance for a while and then dropped out of sight. By the time Barbara's heart had softened toward him, it was too late. But even in situations where your offender or a person you have offended is still part of your everyday life, you need to accept the fact that it's probably going to be up to you to begin the healing process. After all, you're the one reading a book on forgiveness, so the concept is apparently one you've been thinking about. That puts the ball in your court. Once you begin to get the first inkling that you need to forgive someone or ask for forgiveness from someone, that's probably a fairly good indication that you need to take the first initiative. I cannot begin to relate the countless stories of regret that I've heard from people who wish they had done something that they knew they should do at the time, before it was too late. Expecting someone else to get the message about forgiveness isn't exactly something you can count on. Look around you. TV, commercials, movies, the internet, and music frequently sound out a message of revenge, not forgiveness. It's not impossible to find the inspiration to forgive, but there are an awful lot of messages out there trying to convince us that we need to get the upper hand on our offenders. The chance that someone will stumble on a message about forgiveness, a message powerful enough to penetrate their heart, is just that, a chance. Don't take that chance. If you have offended someone and you want to ask their forgiveness, don't put it off. Barbara realized that too late. She never confronted her brother about the possibility that he'd been drinking again before she abruptly threw him out. She needed his forgiveness for that. She may never get it now. Likewise, she wanted to let him know that she'd forgiven him from stealing from her. Most of all, though, she just wanted to be reconciled with him. There's always the possibility, of course, that he would have rejected her, but at least she would have peace knowing that she had tried. Living with that kind of regret is particularly painful. Our sins of omission often cause more suffering than our sins of commission do. There are many persons ready to do what is right because in their hearts they know it is right, but they hesitate, waiting for the other person to make the first move, and they in turn wait for you. If you are ready to do what in your heart you know is right, don't wait for the other person. To them, you're the other person, and they're waiting for you to make the first move. Here's the reflection. Think about what it is that holds you back from doing what is right. Consider all the possibilities: fear, pride, uncertainty, shame, embarrassment, and so forth. The fear of rejection is an especially powerful deterrent when it comes to forgiveness and reconciliation, for example. How can you get past those factors in order to take the initiative you know you should take? And the practice. Make a list of every situation in your life in which you are waiting for someone else to make the first move. It doesn't have to be related to forgiveness or reconciliation. Maybe it's another couple's turn to have you and your significant other over for dinner. Who cares whose turn it is? If you want to get together with them, invite them back over to your house for dinner. We often don't realize the pleasure we deprive ourselves of all because we're waiting for someone else to take the initiative. All right, now here are the quotes from this chapter. Only the one who has been hurt can bring healing. The other person cannot. It is the one who has been hurt who has to be willing to be hurt again to show love. If there is to be hope, that healing will come. Francis Schaeffer. Forgiveness is the healing of wounds caused by another. You choose to let go of a past wrong and no longer be hurt by it. Forgiveness is a strong move to make, like turning your shoulders sideways to walk quickly on a crowded sidewalk. It's your move. Gordon Atkinson. Resentment is one burden that is incompatible with your success. Always be the first to forgive and forgive yourself first, always. Dan Zadra. All right, so that completes our first video on this book here, The Sacred Art of Forgiveness. I hope that you guys find this book to resonate with you. I thought it might speak to a broader audience. I do have a lot of spiritual genre type books, but they're very specific, and I feel like this one would resonate with more people. I think this is something that each and every human being on this planet struggles with at one point or another. And so I find that it spoke to me. So I figured, you know what, if it speaks to me, it may speak to others. So hopefully you will get something from this, and I hope to, as well as I do with all of the books that I read on here. So until next time, please take care of yourself. Please take care of those around you. I will see you again very soon for more of this of our new book. Okay, take care. Bye-bye.